Ever wanted a Masters of the Universe tabletop miniature game? Well, it's finally here. And Archon Studios, who have many published games in the board game medium, are the ones to bring it. The game is built upon a hex-based board skirmish system that we've seen become a very popular choice in recent times, since the success of other similar games such as Riot Quest, Warhammer Underworlds, and God Tier, among others. And it's not an easy genre to break into, given that most of these games are some of the best out there. I'm glad to report though that whilst Masters of the Universe Battleground does take some aspects from these games, it very much still manages to feel like its own game with some different takes on the system, whilst keeping the same addictive nature that comes with this style as others before it did. The starter set for the game allows two players to take on either the Masters of the Universe, commanded by He-Man himself, or the Evil Warriors led by the Evil Skeletor. Each side has 5 models to choose from, and the set comes with all the counters, rulers and dice you'd expect. Also a sturdy fold-out hexed board and a hefty amount of terrain for your games. The game is based around cards for activating, and so deck building is also a thing. However, pre-built decks for starter games are provided if you aren't into that sort of thing. Masters of the Universe, or sometimes just referred to as He-Man based on its main character, is a huge IP that recently found its revival with a Netflix animated series that carried the genre forwards. The main premise revolves around the conflict between He-Man and Skeletor on the planet Eternia, with a vast lineup of supporting characters in a hybrid setting of medieval sword and sorcery and sci-fi technology. Since its initial launch in the 80s, the franchise has spawned a variety of products, including multiple lines of action figures, 6 animated television series, several comic series, video games, books and magazines, a daily newspaper comic strip and 2 feature films. With all of this down and a cult fan base to follow, it's time we added a miniature game to that list. The miniatures and art design for the characters in Battleground seem pretty accurate to me and match the rest of the franchise just fine. So if you are a fan, I imagine you will be at the very least pleased with the look of the game. It's worth pointing out though that you don't need to have prior knowledge of the lore or franchise in general, given that thankfully the game itself offers enough fun and addictive gameplay to sink your teeth into. Masters of the Universe Battleground uses a system whereby you draw fate cards from a deck of 20 that you can either build yourself or use one of the pre-built decks marked by insignia for your chosen faction to make deck building easy. The starter set provides these and many more card options to make initial deck building fairly interesting, but before possible future expansions add more to this. At the beginning of the game you draw 5 of these cards and use these for activating models. The fate cards list an initiative value on which both you and your opponent secretly choose a card based on that value. Both reveal at the same time, then whoever has the highest simply attaches that fate card to a model and they get to go first. The card will also state how many action points and how much mana your model receives for their activation. At the bottom of the card you also get a choice between 2 other bonuses. These are usually gain +1 action point / mana, or gain a bonus for the activation such as +1 to your model's attacks, etc. You also have a separate smaller deck of chosen glory cards, which are the same as fate cards but also offer a secondary objective as one of the bonus options. However, you only draw 3 of the 8 cards and discard one of your choice. You can only get those 2 glory cards for the rest of the game. If you choose to go with the secondary objective for the bonus, it has to then be achieved during that model's activation, which can provide some pretty tense moments in the game. If you meet the secondary objective, you gain that many glory or victory points. Once both players activate a model each, you then repeat the initiative step again, so you want to make sure you have enough of the right cards in your hand. This gets even more interesting with activation boosts though. At any point after you've played your fate card and chosen a character to go, you can boost it with more fate cards. The only difference is the model only now benefits from one of the bottom stat bonuses and not the AP/mana at the top of the card that you get with your first. This activation system, pairing with the initiative, is incredibly smooth and addictive, and is by far the most redeeming quality of Battleground. The choice you have to make when you know you need priority, but the card with the highest initiative value also has low AP/mana buffs for the activation. The starter set also comes with a separate Battleground setup book. This contains a key so that you can match up all the different pieces of terrain you get in the set to battlefield setup maps, of which the book contains multiple and points out where to place the terrain for that specific scenario, making setup simple. So how does this then mix with game objectives, etc? Well, you always get 20 victory points for every objective you claim on the map, and you gain points for taking out enemy models or by achieving your secondary objectives on glory cards. The Battlegrounds book also lists points values for characters and any weapon or item attachments they had during the game. You gain all of this in victory points once you take out that specific model. Secondary objectives you only have 2 of, so be sure to use them wisely. These can vary between making 3 attacks in one activation or spending 5 or more mana in one activation to gain 20 or 30 victory points. The main way to score victory points though is via physical objectives on the battlefield. The map setup tends to have 1 or 2 objectives already placed pre-game on the map, and then each player gets 2 objectives each to place, one of which has to be placed in your own deployment zone, which you cannot score. This is fine, but the downside is all of the map setups have nothing different to offer beyond terrain setup and objective placement, but otherwise it's the same. So grab objectives and kill, which then puts a lot of pressure on secondary objectives to mix up each scenario or map setup. But you only ever get 2 a game, and they can be very tough to achieve if you get a poor draw at the beginning for your 3 to choose from. You tend to just then ignore them and go for kills or objectives instead. The gameplay is addictive and terrain setups make each map feel different, but I wish there were some extra rules added for each map to mix up the feel of each game, so make them feel more like a scenario rather than just a map setup. Like optional narrative twists or objectives with different rules, such as claiming the middle objective for 30 points instead of 20, or you have to place one of your objectives on terrain. Even battlefield twists such as fighting at night for reduced perception and line of sight range, or a sandstorm is brewing so movement is reduced. These things all do detract from each game, but to be honest it more or less just kind of takes away from the longevity of the game and replayability more than anything. Action points are a finite resource with your fate cards in Battleground, so you want to use them sparingly. You can use your action points to do any of the following: focus, move, attack, use an active skill, or Overwatch. These all cost 1 action point, but if you choose to focus, move, or Overwatch a second time, it would cost 2 instead of the 1, then if you used it a third time it would cost 3 AP instead of 2, etc. Movement is simple, and you just move your model the number of hexes equal to their movement stat. However, you have a second movement stat that allows longer movement if you use a focus action first. Focus can also increase the scope of your next attack. Overwatch means you are readied for when an enemy character moves within your movement range or line of sight and within range of a character's weapon, and as soon as they move in range you have to stop play and interrupt. This is made even better by the fact that you can use the boost rule though, as you get 1 AP for interrupting, but you can also boost with fate cards to get more out of the Overwatch. Attacks are based on strength tests for melee and perception tests for ranged. Magic is generally similar to ranged but uses the power stat and goes against your opponent's mind instead of toughness. You always need to get in a hex adjacent to an enemy model to use melee. You can equip any characters with weapons from a long list at an extra point cost when the list building happens. These weapons will have unique abilities adding buffs/debuffs to your stats or dice. The scope is what all tests are based on and can be increased or decreased on a d6. You always need a 4+ standard on any test unless your weapon/skill increases or decreases it. This keeps it simple as it's always 50-50 and you don't need to make extra attack checks or for individual hit stats, etc. When using a weapon it will have a chart showing successes equals damage, so whether it's a ranged or melee attack, you roll attack and then your opponent rolls defense, and the difference between the number of successes is matched against how much damage it causes with that weapon. All tests are on a 4+ for successes, but you can also explode crits in this game. So on a 6+ your dice explode, and if you get a 5+ on that roll, you get another success. If you roll another 6+ though, yep, you got it, it keeps exploding. This made for some crazy situations, and although I think it's just carelessly thrown into some game systems, it really actually fits nicely into this game as damage is limited on weapons anyway. Mana is also important as you can only have a max of 5, but you can use as many as you like to re-roll a die on a test per mana spent. Mana is also generally needed to use a magic weapon. Some weapons also allow you to spend mana to add 1 die to the test per mana spent, or increase scope, etc. The last thing you can choose to use on a character stat card are skills. These are powers or skills unique to that character, that either give you out buffs or debuffs, or do something else unique to that character. Considering that really you play match play here and that's what you get, everything regarding replayability relies heavily on deck building and future expansions to mix up the gameplay and models/factions to play with. Very much like at Warhammer Underworlds, where the game relies heavily upon new warbands and cards being added to the game to mix up the meta or just give more options if you aren't a competitive player. This is where I find the choice to go with this style of game a little bit of a waste given the rich lore you have to fall on with the IP. However, I completely get that a more linear and hexboard based game system is probably more under Archon's umbrella of game design expertise. That being said, it doesn't go to complete waste as the rules are designed still with the characters in mind, and they do the best they can with it. He-Man can't gain mana in a normal fashion, and you have to rely on support models to give him it, and when he attacks and does get rerolls, he's the absolute beast you'd expect him to be. Or take Orko, who can dish out his mana to aid the likes of He-Man, but he's also not the most reliable little wizard, so he has to take a test before he can make any magic tests. The evil warriors are also great fun. Skeletor can sneakily teleport friendly models around the table, and if you attach his Havoc staff he gains mana whenever friendly models take damage. Merman was my favourite though. He can place down a puddle of water to slow down your enemies, and if someone is stuck in it he gains bonuses against them with his trident. So overall the characters all feel unique and fun to use. I will admit I did find myself going meow whenever Skeletor did something even remotely effective. One thing that could have been done better, which I've already slightly touched on though, is the glory cards. You have the likes of Underworlds where glory cards and scoring VP flow nicely. You score a card and then draw another. And you have objectives tailored to specific factions and their playstyle. In Battleground you only get 2 glory cards for the whole game, and they are generally not always very achievable, and unfortunately you can't swap them out, you're stuck with them for the rest of the game. There are no objectives tailored to each faction, they are all rather generic and don't name specific characters, etc. I feel this was a massive missed opportunity to increase the narrative feel for each faction and make them feel more unique with their own cards. But luckily the gameplay is addictive enough and the skills on the character cards are enough to take away from this aspect of the game. It's more after getting multiple games under your belt that you start to recognise these faults, and it can start to get more stale. Hopefully though, expansions and more rules/factions added to the game can clear this up a bit, as it would be relatively easy to just drop an expansion of faction specific cards. For the most part, Masters of the Universe Battleground manages to shine out in a genre now filled with great titles such as Warhammer Underworlds or Riot Quest, by keeping up the addictive and fast paced gameplay that others provide, whilst introducing a great new initiative and activation mechanic that keeps you on your toes and gets you thinking on many levels. This deck and list building is fun and worth your time, although not as tailored to individual factions as I'd like. The way you score victory points in the game and the fact you don't really get different quests/scenarios can make the large open board battles seem a bit empty here and there. It's more just different map setups with the same scoring rules in every game you play. This area could have done with a little more work, especially the glory cards, which are limited to 2 a game and offer generic secondary objectives that, if expanded on, could have fixed a lot of the previously mentioned issues. But this is something that can easily be expanded upon and fixed in the future. Archon has said you can expect more if the game does well, which let's hope it does. It has the potential to get even better, but already has the core rules set to stand out among an already thriving genre of skirmish hex-based miniature games. It's also worth noting that unfortunately the game is only licensed for Europe, and so if you are anywhere else you may have to wait a while before you get hold of the game, if at all. But for now, if you are a fan of these types of games, or of Masters of the Universe in general, this is a game worth looking at, easy to learn, and should give you many hours of addictive fun, fighting through the fields of Eternia. Thanks so much for watching this video. You can go over to Board in Brum, our sponsors, to check out everything you need for your wargaming needs. You can follow the link in the description below, or just go straight to wargamingluke.com for the full article on this final review. Otherwise, stick around here at Wargaming Luke for all things Masters of the Universe Battleground, and until next time, as always, happy wargaming.